somewhere beyond the edge of the known world, beneath skies that Roman mapmakers left deliberately blank, an entire legion of soldiers simply ceased to exist. They had fought in Spain, crossed the Channel into Britain, and held the empire's northern frontier for decades, veterans of some of Rome's bloodiest campaigns. Then, around the year 108 AD, their name appears for the last time in the historical record, carved into stone at a fortress in northern England. And after that, silence. No battle is mentioned, no defeat recorded, no monument raised to explain where 5,000 soldiers went. For more than 19 centuries, historians, archaeologists, and storytellers have searched for an answer that the Roman records refuse to give. Tonight, we follow the trail of the lost Ninth Legion. Into the mist, into the mystery, and into once the ancient world's most haunting unsolved disappearances. Welcome back, friends, to another quiet journey through the ancient world. I am so glad you are here tonight, wherever here happens to be for you. Before we begin, I would love to know, what time is it where you are and which corner of the world are you watching from? And as you settle in, I want to ask you something to carry into this story with you. If an entire army could vanish without a single written explanation, what do you think that silence is trying to tell us? If you enjoy evenings like this one, please consider liking this video and subscribing. It means the world to this little channel. Now, let us dim the lights and step together into one of Rome's greatest mysteries. Long before the legions of Rome cast their shadows across Britain, there was a time when the Ninth Legion did not yet exist, when the world that would shape it was still forming. Somewhere around 65 BC, in the rugged western province of Hispania, a Roman general named Pompey the Great gathered soldiers and forged them into a unit. That unit would carry the name of the land where it was born, Hispana, and would endure for over a century. Its story begins not with conquest, but with the quiet act of a commander assembling men. The cognomen Hispana carried meaning beyond mere geography. In Roman military tradition, a legion's name was its memory, a permanent inscription of where it had served, what it had endured, and what it had earned. Names like Germanica, Macedonica, and Britannica were not simply labels. They were histories pressed into a single word. Hispana meant the Iberian lands, the rocky highlands and river valleys of a province at the western edge of the Roman world. To bear that name was to carry those hills, those campaigns, and those first soldiers within the legion's identity forever. When Julius Caesar became governor of Cisalpine Gaul in 58 BC, he inherited 4 legions already stationed there. Among them was the 9th. Caesar's own writings record the legion by name during the Gallic Wars, specifically at the Battle of the Sabis River in 57 BC, where the 9th bore the full force of the Nervi assault. Driven back, but not broken, the soldiers held until Caesar himself arrived to rally them. They turned the tide of that battle. From that moment, the 9th was no longer simply a garrison force inherited from another general. It had become Caesar's own. The Gallic Wars were long and shaped the 9th deeply. For 7 years, from 58 to 51 BC, the legion marched, built, fought, and endured across Gaul. It participated in sieges at Eboracum and Alesia, crossed the Rhine, and suppressed the final resistance, at Uxellodunum. Beyond the battles, legionaries constructed roads, dug ramparts, and raised siege towers. The quiet, exhausting labor that made Roman victory possible. By the time the wars ended, the Ninth was not merely a fighting unit. It was a living institution carrying within its ranks the memory of a decade of shared experience. After Caesar's death in 44 BC, the Roman world fractured, but the Ninth remained loyal to the Caesarian cause. Its veterans were recalled by Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, and the legion fought once more against Sextus Pompeius in the Sicilian campaigns, and finally at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, where Octavian's decisive victory ended the long era of civil wars. When the fighting was over and the last embers of the Republic faded into the early calm of what would become the Roman Empire, the Ninth Legion was still standing, worn, changed, but unbroken. The Cantabrian Wars, fought between 25 and 19 BC under Emperor Augustus, brought the Ninth to the rugged northern mountains of the Iberian Peninsula. It was here that the legion fought to complete Rome's conquest of Hispania, and here that its famous cognomen became formally attached to its name, Hispana. The name already carried resonance from decades past, but now it was inscribed in the records of the new empire, bound permanently to the unit. A legion's name, once fixed in imperial stone, became something close to immortality. And the Ninth had earned its place among those names. To understand the Ninth Legion is to understand what a Roman legion was, a living city in motion. Approximately 5,000 infantrymen organized into 10 cohorts, each cohort divided into centuries of around 80 men. At its heart stood the first cohort, elite and double strength. The most experienced soldiers gathered into a single, powerful corps. Officers, centurions, standard-bearers, engineers, medics, and craftsmen all moved within this structure. Every legionary carried his equipment, maintained his weapons, trained daily, and answered to a chain of command that stretched from the humblest soldier to the emperor himself. At the center of every legion's identity stood a single sacred object, the aquila, the golden eagle standard. Carried by an elite soldier called the aquilifer, the eagle was more than a symbol. It was the soul of the unit. Soldiers believed that as long as the eagle remained, the legion could not be truly defeated. To lose it in battle was a catastrophe beyond ordinary military defeat. It was a wound to Rome itself. After the disaster at the Teutoburg Forest in 9 AD, where 3 eagles were lost to Germanic warriors, Rome spent decades attempting to recover them. The eagle was not merely precious, it was everything. Life within the Ninth Legion, as within all legions, was built on routine and endurance. Soldiers marched up to 30 kilometers a day beneath loads of 30 to 40 kilograms. They trained with wooden swords heavier than real blades, built temporary camps each night with standardized precision, and maintained their weapons and armor with daily care. Their diet centered on grain, wheat prepared as porridge, supplemented with olive oil, cheese, and wine. Pay was modest, approximately 225 denarii per year, with deductions for food and equipment. What sustained the men was not comfort, but the certainty of belonging to their 8-man tent group, their century, their cohort, their legion. When Emperor Claudius resolved to invade Britain in 43 AD, the Ninth Legion was among the 4 chosen for the campaign. Alongside Legio II Augusta, Legio XIV Gemina, and Legio Fati, The ninth would form part of an invasion force numbering between 35 and 40,000 soldiers, servants and support personnel, requiring approximately 1,000 ships to carry them across the Channel. The overall command fell to Aulus Plautius, a distinguished senator and experienced general. Claudius's motivation was partly personal. The invasion would secure his legitimacy, and partly imperial, for Britain promised resources, taxation, and the enduring glory of conquest. The Romans knew something of Britain before they arrived. Caesar had touched its shores a century before, and traders and exiled kings had carried intelligence back to Rome over the decades. They knew of the Catuvellauni and the Trinovantes, of the Iceni in the east and the great Brigantes tribe in the north. They knew of tin and iron and fertile land. But knowing and understanding were different things. Britain was a fragmented world of Celtic tribes, powerful kings, dense forests, and an unfamiliar wildness that no report had fully captured. With the 9th Legion now crossing into Britain as part of Emperor Claudius's great invasion force, the real test of the legion's endurance was only just beginning. For the island they were entering was nothing like the orderly provinces they had known before. Roman Britain was a land divided by nature itself. To the south and east lay gentle, rolling lowlands, fertile plains where towns grew slowly and farms spread across quiet valleys. But northward and westward, the land shifted into something older and wilder. The Pennines rose in dark ridges, bogs stretched across moorland, dense forests swallowed the light. The Romans understood this division clearly. Where the land was open, they built cities. Where the land resisted, they built forts, and garrisoned them with legions whose watch never ended. At the heart of this northern world stood Eboracum, the great legionary fortress that would one day become the city of York. Founded in 71 CE, it rose at the meeting of the rivers Ouse and Foss, built on flat ground that commanded the waterways flowing through the land. General Quintus Petilius Cerialis led the 9th Legion northward from Lincoln to establish this stronghold, following the standard Roman design, a playing card shape of earth and timber, organized within by roads, barracks, a headquarters building, granaries, and baths. It was not merely a camp, it was a statement of permanence. Life inside a frontier fortress like Eboracum was one of constant labor and measured routine. Soldiers drained ditches, repaired gates, resurfaced roads, and maintained granaries against the damp northern climate. Evenings brought small reliefs, communal meals, the warmth of a bathhouse, the low hum of conversation in barracks. But beyond the walls, a civilian settlement was already taking shape. Traders arrived, craftsmen built workshops, families settled along the roads leading southward. The fortress drew life around it like a slow tide, and the line between soldier and civilian grew, over years gradually softer. Roman Britain was administered by a single imperial governor, a man of consular rank who held both military command and civil authority over the entire province. Beneath him, a procurator managed finances, while local populations were organized into municipalities with their own magistrates. 4 legions anchored the province, the 2nd Augusta at Caerleon, the 20th at Chester, the 6th at York, and the 9th, moving steadily northward as the frontier expanded. These were not isolated garrisons. They communicated, reinforced one another, and moved together when the province demanded it. the empire held its edge through coordination as much as force. Far to the east of Eboracum, in the tribal lands of Norfolk and Cambridgeshire, lived the Iceni, a people who had found uneasy accommodation with Roman rule under their king, Prasutagus. When Prasutagus died around 60 CE, he left half his kingdom to Emperor Nero and half to his family, hoping this arrangement would preserve his dynasty. Roman officials ignored it entirely. Imperial procurator Decianus Catus seized the whole of the Iceni kingdom. Loans were recalled, lands were confiscated, and when the royal family resisted, the response was brutal. Queen Boudica was publicly flogged, and her daughters were assaulted by Roman soldiers. The humiliation of Boudica and her daughters was not an isolated act. Across the province, Roman officials had imposed heavy taxes, seized tribal lands, and shown contempt for local traditions. The Trinovantes, neighbours of the Iceni, harboured their own deep grievances. Roman veterans settled at Camulodunum had driven native inhabitants from their homes. The great temple of Claudius stood there as a symbol not of civilization, but of subjugation. One by one, tribes that might otherwise have fought each other turned instead toward a shared enemy. Boudica moved among them, and an army began to form, vast, aggrieved, and ready. Camulodunum fell first. The Caledonia was overwhelmed, its inhabitants trapped within the unfinished temple of Claudius, before it too was taken. Then came Londinium. Governor Suetonius Paulinus had been campaigning against the Druids on the island of Mona, nearly 250 miles away, when the revolt ignited. He rode hard along Watling Street towards the capital, only to find he lacked the forces to hold it. He made the cold calculation that generals sometimes must. The city was abandoned. Those who could not march with his column were left behind. The rebels entered Londinium and burned it to the ground. The 9th Legion had marched south from its position near Longthorpe to relieve Camulodunum. Tacitus records what happened plainly. The infantry was ambushed and utterly decimated by the forces of Boudica. Only a small number managed to retreat. The legion that had crossed into Britain with such confidence, that had fought across rivers and over hills, had been broken in the field. The defeat was catastrophic. It left Suetonius without the reinforcements he needed, forced the abandonment of Londinium, and cast a long shadow over the 9th Legion's reputation. Verulamium, too, was abandoned and burned. The destruction was sweeping and complete. Across all 3 destroyed cities, Camulodunum, Londinium, and Verulamium, the earth preserved what words almost forgot. Archaeologists would one day uncover a layer of oxidized red and black clay, charcoal, broken amphorae, scorched pottery, and coins minted before 60 CE. This stratum, the Boudican destruction horizon, runs beneath the streets of modern Colchester and London like a scar sealed beneath centuries. Roman-era skulls recovered from the Walbrook stream, burned shopfronts beside Watling Street. The ground itself remembered what had been done there and kept it quietly, patiently, for nearly 2,000 years. Suetonius Paulinus did not despair. He gathered approximately 10,000 legionaries and auxiliaries, chose a narrow defensive position along Watling Street, where forest protected his rear and a river constrained the enemy's flanks, and waited. The vast British force, swollen with confidence after 3 burning cities, advanced against him. But the terrain turned their numbers against them. Roman discipline held the narrow front. The rebels' charge broke upon the locked shields and disciplined volleys of the Roman line. And then the counterattack came. Boudica's army shattered. She chose poison rather than captivity. The revolt was over. Britain remained Roman. The Ninth Legion, shattered by the ambush during Boudica's revolt, was not abandoned. Roman military protocol was clear. Fresh recruits, young men between 17 and 20, were levied and marched to the broken unit. Approximately 2,000 new legionaries arrived as reinforcements, allocated to depleted centuries, trained alongside veterans, and gradually woven back into the fabric of the legion. The standards were raised again. The eagle was carried forward again. Eboracum waited in the north, its stone walls slowly replacing the old timber ramparts, its streets filling with the quiet life of a garrison city. The ninth was rebuilt, returned to strength, and the north called once more. Having survived the fires of revolt and rebuilt its strength within the walls of Eboracum, the Ninth Legion would next be called northward, into country that no Roman army had ever truly conquered. And it was there, in the wild lands beyond the frontier, that the story begins to grow strange. North of the settled provinces, beyond the roads and the garrison towns, the land changed. It grew wilder, steeper, older. The Romans called it Caledonia, a forested territory of craggy mountains, deep glens and slow-moving rivers cutting through moorland that seemed to stretch without end. The Caledonian forest, far more vast in those ancient centuries than any remnant that survives today, pressed close against the highland passes. It was a landscape that resisted order, that swallowed armies and returned silence. And yet, into this world, Rome chose to march. The man appointed to lead Rome's northern ambition was Gnaeus Julius Agricola, born on the 13th of June, 40th CE, in the southern Gallic town of Forum Julii. He came from a senatorial family, his father executed by the Emperor Caligula. When Agricola was still a child, his upbringing shaped by his mother, Julia Priscilla, a woman Tacitus described as one of singular virtue. Educated at Massilia, Agricola showed early inclinations toward philosophy, though it was the military that would define him. His first posting was to Britain itself, serving as a young tribune under Governor Suetonius Paulinus during the turbulent years of Boudica's uprising. Agricola's career advanced steadily through the decades. He served as quaestor in Asia, as tribune, as praetor, and aligned himself with Vespasian during the civil war of 69 CE, a loyalty that rewarded him generously. He governed Aquitania, held the consulship, and was eventually appointed governor of Britannia. His daughter married the historian Tacitus around 77 CE, a union that would ensure Agricola's legacy endured long after his death. It is through Tacitus's biography, the Agricola, that nearly everything about these northern campaigns survives. Yet that source comes weighted with the tenderness of a son-in-law and must be read with gentle caution. From 78 CE onward, Agricola methodically consolidated Roman authority across Britain, first in Wales, then against the Brigantes of northern England. By 80 CE, his gaze moved further north, into the borderlands between the modern Scottish lowlands and the Firth of Forth. Slowly, deliberately, he pushed the Roman frontier forward, spending years securing territory before crossing the Forth Clyde line in 83 CE with approximately 25,000 men. a legionary fortress was established at Inchtoothiel on the River Tay, signalling not a raid but an intention. Rome meant, for a time at least, to hold this ground and press deeper still. Not all encounters with the northern tribes came in open daylight. In 82 or 83 CE, the Caledonians launched a surprise attack in darkness, targeting the camp of the 9th Legion, which Tacitus described as the weakest of the 3 legions on campaign. The attackers cut down sentries and broke into the camp itself, driving deep into the sleeping soldiers before the alarm could fully spread. Hand-to-hand fighting erupted in the dark, desperate and close. Agricola, positioned some miles away with other forces, dispatched cavalry relief immediately. As they struck the Caledonians from behind, the embattled 9th found new resolve and fought back, repelling the assault before dawn. The climax of Agricola's northern campaigns came at a place the Romans recorded as Mons Graupius, somewhere in the northeastern highlands, with Boudica in Aberdeenshire among the sites most favoured by modern scholars. Here the Caledonian Confederacy assembled, a gathered force of perhaps 15,000 to 30,000 warriors, resolved that open battle was unavoidable. Opposing them stood Agricola's army, legionaries and auxiliaries numbering between 11 and 17,000. The Caledonians held the higher ground. Below them, in disciplined lines, the Romans waited. Tacitus records that both sides understood the weight of what was about to unfold. Before the battle, Tacitus places a speech in the mouth of the Caledonian leader Calgacus, a man he calls the most distinguished for birth and valour among the chieftains. Calgacus, whose name may mean the swordsman, is otherwise unknown outside this single source. The speech he has given challenges Roman imperialism with quiet ferocity, declaring that Rome makes a desert and calls it peace. Scholars today are nearly certain these words belong to Tacitus himself, rather than to any Caledonian voice. A literary device common in classical writing, allowing the historian to voice political dissent through the mouth of a distant enemy. Yet someone like Calgacus almost certainly existed. The battle itself unfolded as Roman battles tended to. Disciplined formation against tribal charge. The Caledonians advanced without the structured cohesion of the legions, and Agricola's forces answered with characteristic precision. Short swords, long shields, and a devastating cavalry strike along the flanks that shattered the Caledonian formation. Tacitus records Roman losses at approximately 360 and Caledonian dead at 10,000. Figures that historians treat with significant skepticism, recognizing that such numbers served Roman propaganda as much as history. What seems certain is that the Caledonians were routed, though roughly 2/3 of their force escaped northward into the highlands as darkness fell. Following his victory at Mons Graupius, Agricola dispatched a Roman fleet that sailed around the northern coast of Britain, confirming what had long been suspected, that the island was entirely bounded by sea. It was a moment of great symbolic significance for Rome. Yet within a year, Agricola himself was recalled. Emperor Domitian, according to Tacitus, was moved by jealousy of his governor's celebrated successes, though the reality likely involved the practical demands of other frontiers, the cost of maintaining distant garrisons, and the natural rotation of imperial appointments. Agricola received formal honours on his return, triumphal decorations and a statue, but no further commands were offered. He died in Rome on the 23rd of August, 93 CE. After Agricola's departure, the Roman frontier in northern Britain contracted steadily. The legionary fortress at Inchtuthil, still unfinished, was evacuated by around 87 CE. The Gasque Ridge system of forts and watchtowers was abandoned entirely. Rome pulled back to the Steingate corridor in the Tyne-Solway region, anchored by large forts at Vindolanda and Corbridge. Caledonia slipped beyond Rome's reach once more. 3 legions remained to hold what had been won further south. The 2nd Augusta at Caerleon, the 20th at Chester, and the 9th Hispana at Eboracum, the great fortress city the Romans had built at York. There the 9th Legion settled into its northern garrison. In the year 108 CE, the 9th Legion left its name carved in stone at Eboracum. The inscription recorded the rebuilding in stone of the legionary fortress gateway. Completed, it declared, by the agency of the 9th Legion Hispana, in the name of the Emperor Trajan. The stone was discovered in 1864 and now rests in the Yorkshire Museum. It is the last confirmed historical record of the Legion anywhere in Britain. Stamped bricks and inscriptions found at Nijmegen in Germania. Inferior suggest a detachment may have moved to the Rhine frontier in the years following. And then, gradually, the 9th Legion's name fades from the record entirely. And so the stone at Eboracum falls silent, the 9th Legion's name disappearing from the record as quietly as fog lifting from a highland valley. And what follows is not history, but mystery, a puzzle that has occupied scholars for more than a century. In the quiet world of 19th century scholarship, certain voices carried the weight of entire fields. Theodor Mommsen was one such voice. Born in 1817 in the Duchy of Schleswig, he earned his doctorate at 25 and spent decades gathering ancient inscriptions across Italy, building an unrivaled mastery of Roman law, military organization, and history. His 5-volume History of Rome reshaped the discipline entirely. In 1902, he received the Nobel Prize in Literature. When Mommsen spoke of the 9th Legion, scholars listened with the kind of quiet attention reserved for those who have spent a lifetime earning it. Mommsen's argument about the 9th Legion rested on 2 foundations, laid carefully and with characteristic precision. The first was epigraphic, the sudden silence in the stone record after AD 108, when the last datable inscription bearing the legion's name was carved in Britain. The second came from the Roman writer Cornelius Fronto, who noted, writing in the AD 160s, that under Hadrian there had been a terrible catastrophe, and that great numbers of soldiers were killed. Fronto's text was fragmentary, naming no legion directly, but Mommsen drew his line between the 2 silences and declared that the 9th had perished somewhere in the cold, northern reaches of Britain. The story Mommsen wove was compelling in its simplicity. Around AD 117 or 118, the Brigantes tribe of northern Britain rose in revolt. Their target, he proposed, was Eboracum, the great legionary fortress at York, the home of the 9th Legion. The attack, in this telling, was swift and devastating, leaving the legion destroyed within its own walls. Fronto's words seemed to breathe life into the silence of the stones. The catastrophe, Mommsen concluded, had been severe enough to draw Emperor Hadrian's personal attention, and severe enough, ultimately, to reshape the entire northwestern edge of the Roman Empire. The northern frontier of Roman Britain in these years was already a restless place. By around AD 100, Roman forces held the Tyne-Solway Isthmus, linking their fortresses through the Staingate Road between Corbridge and Carlisle. Yet the land beyond remained unconquered, inhabited by the Votadini, the Selgovae, the Damnoni, and the Novantae, tribal peoples who resisted Roman authority through raids and uprisings. In AD 117, a significant northern revolt broke out, suppressed only with considerable effort by the governor Quintus Pompeius Falco. The frontier was not simply distant and cold, it was alive with tension and the ever-present possibility of violence. Archaeological evidence from this troubled period carries its own quiet testimony. At Vindolanda, excavations have uncovered a deep carbon-rich layer of ash and charred timber beneath early 2nd century occupation levels. Among the debris lie broken spearheads, arrowheads, and human bones bearing marks of violent injury. Along the Staingate forts at Corbridge and Catterick, burnt deposits and repaired defensive walls have been dated by radiocarbon analysis to the same window, roughly AD 100 to 120. These are not the traces of accident or slow decay. They are the marks of fire, conflict, and the sudden end of things, pressed into the soil of northern Britain and waiting, quietly, to be read. Roman literary sources, fragile and incomplete as they are, add further texture to this picture. Cornelius Fronto, a senator writing approximately 2 generations after the events, described casualties in Britain on a scale comparable to the Jewish wars in the East, suggesting hundreds, perhaps thousands of soldiers killed and left in disarray. The Historia Augusta, meanwhile, recorded that when Hadrian arrived in Britain, he found troops poorly disciplined, plagued by abuses and corruption. He reformed their equipment, tightened discipline, and permitted only hardy and reputable men to serve as centurions. These were not the words of a province at peace. They were the words of a frontier that had come unravelled. Emperor Hadrian visited Britain in AD 122, arriving as part of a broader tour of an empire that had grown unsettled since his accession in AD 117. Disturbances had erupted not only in Britain, but in Egypt, Judea, Libya, and Mauritania. Hadrian's philosophy of empire differed profoundly from his predecessor Trajan's expansionist vision. Where Trajan had pushed Rome's legions into Dacia and Mesopotamia, Hadrian chose consolidation, defensible boundaries, and permanent frontier structures. Ancient sandstone fragments from Jarrow, dating to AD 118 or 119, preserve the words that captured his intention: to keep the empire intact. Britain, battered and unsettled, would be given a wall. Construction of Hadrian's Wall began in AD 122 and continued for approximately 6 years, stretching 73 miles from Wallsend on the River Tyne in the east to Bowness on Solway in the west. Along its length rose mile castles, observation towers, and large garrison forts. The wall was not simply a military barricade. Its gates may have served as controlled crossing points, regulating movement and trade between the Roman province and the peoples to the north. Hadrian himself intervened during the project, modifying the wall's planned width from 10 Roman feet to 8. It was a living structure, adjusted and reconsidered as its purpose clarified. It would stand manned and garrisoned for 300 years. The story of the 9th Legion's disappearance gains a deeper resonance when set against Rome's known response to lost legions. After the Teutoburg forest disaster of AD 9, when 3 legions were annihilated by Arminius in Germania, Emperor Augustus was said to have wandered his palace in grief, striking his head against the walls and crying out, "Quintilli vare, legiones redder, Quintilius varus, give me back my legions." The numbers of those 3 destroyed legions, the 17th, 18th, and 19th, were never used again. The 9th left no such drama behind it. No cry of mourning was recorded. No number was formally retired. It simply ceased to be listed, and the silence settled over it, like ash. Modern archaeological reassessment has added quiet caution to Mommsen's confident thesis. Hadrian's Wall stood manned and operational for roughly 300 years after its construction, a span suggesting that the northern tribes presented a persistent but manageable challenge rather than an overwhelming existential threat. The relatively modest scale of the mile castles and towers along its length reflects defences proportionate to periodic raids and uprisings, not to the kind of catastrophic, empire-ending pressure that the destruction of an entire legion might imply. Some historians have begun to ask whether the wall functioned less as a monument to disaster and more as a controlled border, an administrative and economic boundary, adjusted carefully to suit the realities of frontier life. For generations, the theory held a firm and comfortable place in the historical imagination. A great legion lost in the northern dark of Britain, a grieving empire raising a wall of stone to mark the wound. It was a story with the weight of stone and the pull of myth. Mommsen's authority gave it scholarly gravity. Fronto's fragmented words gave it literary breadth. The burnt deposits of Vindolanda gave it the smell of real ash. And yet, the evidence had always carried a certain incompleteness, a gap where certainty should have stood. Yet for all its drama and its grip on the popular imagination, the British disaster theory began to loosen its hold on scholars when archaeologists started finding something unexpected on the other side of the empire entirely. The unmistakable mark of the 9th Legion stamped into Roman brick on the banks of the Rhine. By the early 2nd century, the 9th Legion had vanished from the inscriptions of Britain. No farewell was recorded. No final order survived. Only silence. And then, slowly, something unexpected began to surface far to the east, along the broad grey waters of the Rhine. Scholars, piecing together fragments of fired clay and faded stone, began to ask a quieter question than catastrophe. What if the 9th did not fall in northern Britain at all? What if it simply moved on? The first clue emerged not from battlefields, but from building sites. At Nijmegen in the Netherlands, ancient Noviamargus Batavorum, excavations in 1959 uncovered a fragment of a stamped roof tile, bearing the mark of the 9th Legion. It was a small thing, a piece of baked clay pressed with letters before firing, but its implications stretched far beyond its modest size. Decades later, in the 1990s, archaeologists returned and found more than 100 similarly stamped tiles alongside coins, inscriptions, and military artifacts. Roman brick stamps were not decorative. They were functional records pressed into wet clay before firing using hardwood or metal molds, leaving raised letters that identified the military unit responsible for the kiln. The Nijmegen tiles bore a distinctive numeral, not the standard 9, but the alternative form, a hoend, suggesting these bricks came not from the entire legion, but from a detachment. Dated to approximately 104 to 120 CE, spanning the reigns of Trajan and Hadrian, they placed elements of the Ninth Legion on the Rhine frontier long after the last known inscription from York. Noviomagus itself was no minor outpost. The legionary fortress at Huneberg, overlooking the Waal River, measured roughly 650 meters on each side, and had served Roman armies since the time of Agrippa, nearly 2 centuries before. Multiple legions had passed through its walls over the years, the 1st Germanica, the 10th Gemina, and others. When the 10th Gemina was transferred to the Danube around 104 CE, something filled the gap. The Nijmegen evidence suggests that something was a force connected to the 9th Legion. Yet scholars are careful not to overreach. The Nijmegen finds do not prove the entire 9th Legion relocated to the Rhine. Some researchers argue only a vexillation, a detachment, was ever present there, pointing to tile stamps reading Vex Brit, a phrase indicating troops drawn from Britain. Others suggest the whole legion arrived in stages, first a detachment, then perhaps the main body. The chronology remains uncertain, the transitions between phases impossible to date precisely. What is agreed is that the Nijmegen evidence represents the latest surviving record of the 9th Legion anywhere in the Roman world. Additional traces surfaced beyond Nijmegen. At Aachen-Bertscheid, a sparse site within the province of Germania Inferior, an altar was erected by a legionary officer of the 9th. A silver-plated bronze pendant bearing military associations appeared in the Rhine-Danube region. Stamped ceramics connected to the legion were found scattered across the frontier zone. Each discovery was small, each separated from the others by distance and uncertainty, but together they wove a faint thread eastward, away from the grey skies of northern Britain, toward the warmer and more turbulent edges of the empire. Some theories carried the 9th still further east into the burning deserts of Mesopotamia. Between 113 and 117 CE, Emperor Trajan launched a sweeping campaign against the Parthian Empire, pushing Roman armies through the Taurus Mountains, down between the Tigris and Euphrates, and ultimately to the Parthian capital of Ctesiphon. It was among the most ambitious military ventures in Rome's history, yet no inscription, no tile stamp, no document of any kind places the 9th Legion among the forces Trajan assembled for this great Eastern War. The legions documented in Trajan's Parthian campaign were the 1st Adeutrix, the 2nd Triana, the 3rd Cyrenaica, the 12th Fulminata, the 15th Apollinaris, and the 16th Flavia. The 9th is absent from every surviving record of that Eastern War. Roman legions left traces wherever they marched, inscriptions, altars, stamps, tombstones. The silence around the 9th in the eastern provinces is itself a form of evidence. It suggests the legion was not there, at least not in any documented or significant capacity. A third possibility carries the story into tragedy. The Bar Kokhba revolt, erupting between 132 and 135 CE, was the most devastating Jewish uprising Rome ever faced. Emperor Hadrian's plans to rebuild Jerusalem as a pagan city ignited a rebellion so fierce, so organized, that Rome was compelled to assemble multiple legions to suppress it. The rebels issued their own coins, held fortified positions across Judea, and fought from networks of tunnels and hidden strongholds. The suppression came at enormous cost, and not all Roman units emerged from the conflict intact. Another legion, the 22nd Deotariana, last recorded in Egypt in 119 CE, vanished from Roman records around the same period. An inscription from the Caesarea Maritima aqueduct, dated to approximately 133 to 134 CE, bore signs of deliberate erasure, damnatio memoriae, suggesting catastrophic loss. By 145 CE, when an official list of all Roman legions was compiled, the 22nd was simply gone. Some historians have suggested both the 22nd and the 9th met their ends in Judea, which would represent the gravest Roman military disaster since the Teutoburg forest. Yet no inscription names the 9th in Judea. The connection remains speculation. By the 21st century, scholarly consensus had shifted meaningfully. The old certainty of a dramatic destruction in Caledonia had softened into something more complicated. A recognition that the 9th likely moved east, passed through the Rhine frontier, and then disappeared into a silence that no surviving document has yet broken. The Nijmegen tiles represent the last confirmed whisper of the legion's name. After approximately 120 CE, the 9th is absent from every known list, every papyrus, every stone. And yet, there remains one final possibility. Quieter than disaster, less dramatic than annihilation, but perhaps in its own way the most unsettling of all. The theory that the 9th Legion did not die in any single moment, but simply faded, thinning away until there was nothing left to record. Some mysteries do not resolve. They simply deepen, growing quieter with each passing century, until the silence itself becomes the only answer history offers. The 9th Legion is one such mystery. It did not leave a dramatic final inscription, no battlefield eulogy, no emperor's lament carved in stone. It simply ceased to appear in the records. And the records moved on without it. What remained was an absence, elegant and complete, like a word removed from a sentence that still somehow makes its meaning felt. One explanation historians consider is that the 9th did not fall in a single catastrophic moment, but dissolved slowly, like morning frost. The gradual attrition theory proposes that combat losses, disease and desertion wore the legion down across many years. Recruitment from the local British population remained limited. Soldiers were pulled away to reinforce other Roman units across the empire. Eventually, the 9th fell below the threshold needed to survive as a distinct force. Roman command quietly disbanded what remained, merging the survivors into neighboring legions. No single battle. No single grave. Only a long, slow fading. The 9th was not alone in such a fate. Other Roman legions dissolved in similar silence. Legio IV Minervia faded into frontier forces. Legio XIII Gallica was folded into later field armies. Legio II Parthica simply vanished from eastern records, its troops presumably reassigned. Legio I Flavia disappeared in the early 3rd century without a recorded battle to mark its end. Even a later unit, sometimes called Legio I Ultimum, passed quietly into the service of the Vandal kingdom around 404 AD. Rome was vast and long-lasting, and many of its legions ended not with destruction, but with quiet administrative erasure. The Notitia Dignitatum, that great official ledger of the late Roman military, lists every surviving legion of the empire. The 9th does not appear. This omission carries weight because Roman bureaucracy was meticulous. Legions that endured into the 4th century were recorded, even if diminished. The 9th's absence signals not merely silence, but finality. The last confirmed physical trace of its existence is an inscribed stone slab from York, dated to around AD 108, found during reconstruction work at the fortress. After that stone was laid, the Ninth Legion left no further mark upon the world it had once helped to shape. Modern historians speak carefully about what can and cannot be known. The balance of scholarly opinion leans toward a disappearance rooted in Britain during the late 110s or early 120s, a period of provincial instability and unrest among the northern tribes. Archaeologist Miles Russell of Bournemouth University reflects this majority view, arguing that the most plausible answer places the ninth in British soil. Yet other scholars point to brick and tile stamps bearing the legion's name found near Nijmegen in the Netherlands, dated between AD 104 and 120. Suggesting at least part of the legion moved to the continental frontier before its end. Into this historical silence, a novelist arrived with a lantern. Rosemary Sutcliffe was born in Surrey in 1920, the daughter of a Royal Naval officer. She spent her childhood moving between Malta and various naval postings, always an outsider, always watching one culture press against another. Contracted with Still's disease as a child, she spent much of her life in a wheelchair and did not learn to read until the age of 9. Her mother filled those early years with Celtic and Saxon legends. From those ancient stories, Sutcliffe built the imaginative world she would spend her life writing into being. In 1954, Oxford University Press published Sutcliffe's novel, The Eagle of the Ninth. Its central inspiration came from a bronze Roman eagle, discovered wingless at the archaeological site of Silchester and displayed in Reading Museum. Around that artifact, Sutcliffe built a story of Marcus Flavius Aquila, a young Roman centurion who travels north beyond Hadrian's Wall in disguise, accompanied by his freed British slave Esca, searching for his father's lost legion and its missing eagle standard. The novel accepted the then prevailing theory that the Ninth had been annihilated in a great northern tribal uprising, drawing upon Theodore Mommsen's 19th century scholarly conjecture. The Eagle of the Ninth became a landmark of British literature. It sold over 1 million copies, remained continuously in print for more than 5 decades, and found its way onto school curricula throughout the United Kingdom. Sutcliffe herself said it appealed to readers from 8 to 88. The BBC adapted it as a 6-part television series in 1977, with Anthony Higgins portraying Marcus Aquila across 6 Sunday broadcasts from September through October. A feature film followed in 2011, directed by Kevin MacDonald and starring Channing Tatum, bringing the story to a worldwide audience. Though critics noted it traded the novel's nuanced depth for spectacle. Yet the novel's enduring popularity created an unexpected tension with scholarship. Sutcliffe's vivid portrayal of the Ninth, destroyed by northern British tribes, became so deeply embedded in public consciousness that it outlasted the historical theory that inspired it. Modern research has increasingly complicated that narrative. Evidence of the legion appearing on the Rhine frontier after AD 117 suggests the British destruction story may be incomplete. Romano-British historian Shepard Frere acknowledged the uncertainty plainly, noting that further evidence is needed before more can be said. Fiction had given the Ninth a story. Scholarship continued to quietly revise it. Recent archaeological work has added new layers to the question. Simon Elliott used aerial LiDAR and drone imaging to identify what may be a previously unknown Roman engagement in Derbyshire, with 2 small oval enclosures interpreted as remnants of a Roman fort. Farmers in the area had long reported Roman material surfacing in their fields. Elsewhere, brick and tile stamps from Nijmegen continue to support a continental chapter to the ninth story. These discoveries do not resolve the mystery. They simply extend it, adding new corridors to a structure whose exits remain hidden. Each fragment of evidence opens a door and then closes it again, softly. What the Ninth Legion ultimately teaches is not a lesson about Rome, but about the nature of knowing. The historical record is fragmentary and accidental. What survives was saved by chance, not by design. Entire civilizations, whole centuries of human experience, rest now in permanent silence. Not because nothing happened, but because what happened left no surviving trace. The Ninth Legion vanished into that silence, and the most honest thing scholarship can offer is the courage to say so plainly. And so, the Ninth Legion rests in the only place it has occupied for nearly 2,000 years. Not in any grave we can find, not on any battlefield we can name, but in the quiet, unresolvable space between what history recorded and what it chose to forget.